As we choose which books to purchase for our classrooms and libraries, in many ways we're deciding what we want our students to learn and how we want them to be able to relate to the world. We also want to make sure to not just focus on the realistic, making sure to provide opportunities of fantasy, sci-fi, and storybooks. Picture books were one of the first ways that many of us were exposed to storytelling. It covered not just the narrative, but also the opportunity for us to dream and imagine. And thus, the Caldecott Medal Awards, as they were established to allow for artists to be able to also be recognized. And the criteria involved an excellence of execution of the artistic technique, the pictorial interpretation of story theme or concept, the appropriateness of style of illustration to the story theme or concept, delineation of plot, theme, characters, setting, mood, or information through the pictures, excellence of presentation and recognition of a child audience. They were identifying a distinguished American picture book for children. So they had to consider these specific traits. And of course, it is just an American thing. The only limitation to the graphic form is that the form must be one that is used in a picture book, and the book must be a self-contained entity. No other media is dependent upon it, like a film or a story or a computer program. And then each book is to be considered as a picture book. So the committee is to make their decision primarily on the illustration. And this is from the ALA website in terms of what the criteria is. So keeping these traits in mind, we're going to be analyzing the Caldecott winners or medal winners. And in looking at that, we're going to be starting with the decades and what happened during those traits and how that might have influenced the Caldecott books. So starting with the 30s, there in 1938 was the very first book, and this is when the Depression hit the world, and the Nazis took advantage of this situation, of course, and in 1939 they invaded Poland and sparked the beginning of World War II, and this is according to thoughtco.com. And so as we look at this, it was definitely a difficult time period, and both of the books are actually very similar in terms of style. Their color and design is one color with a white background, meaning that, according to Galda, that's a very safe representation for the reader. The shapes of the art tend to be very large with the placement over the page, so that designates, according to Galda, very strong representation. The lines are rounded, showing that comfort, that safeness that, of course, for a children's book they wanted to represent. The lines for the art itself are thick, blended. The tones are dark and structured. And you can see textures when you look at the book. That's displayed through the shading and the wrinkles that are created with the lines that are drawn. And there's some very deep shading that's done with the lines. It's basically done with pencil, lithograph, and brush. And you can see that they've started already with the first couple years of awards with making sure that the pictures are dominant on the pages, even coming across the middle of the book so that it's a 2-page spread. At least for these, I didn't really see that they had one page that was just a picture very often and that the other page was the storyline. Typically, the artistic design went entirely across the 2 pages, that 2-page spread, and was dominant, as I said before, that there's a very large artistic design drawing the reader's eye to capture the characters that are being created. You can see through the designs that the reader is following the eyes of the characters, following the ways that the weapons are pointed, so that you can pay attention to what's going on. In particular, the book, I believe it's pronounced Meili, However, I am unsure that this particular book took over 2 years to complete the drawings, and the artist actually even has his drawings in the Metropolitan Museum, that he was quite talented. The book itself, according to Horning, was created right before World War II and is recognized as innovative and outstanding. And according to Horning's article, Anne E. Eaton in 1939 in the New York Times said that both the text and the illustrations were created with sympathy, affectionate understanding, and a gentle humor. She goes on to say that basically it's one of the most completely original and artistic picture book of the entire year. At this time, of course, they're trying to figure out what the definition of a picture book was going to be, how it was going to be different than an illustrated book. And so they were just starting to set up the awards to see how they were going to be analyzing books to be able to choose who the winner would be. As we advance to the 1940s, they continued to have a book every year. And as far as historically, we know that the World War II was already underway, and that it was one of the biggest events of the decade, obviously, and the death camps with the Nazis. So there's a lot of turmoil that was happening throughout the world, as we also are aware of Gandhi being assassinated in the 1940s. And so when you look at the books, you can see that some of the illustrative trends are appearing. Even one of the earliest Caldecott winners, the Make Way for Ducklings book, which was 1942, we are starting to see some different angles, kind of giving people the opportunity that when they look at this particular book, they're almost flying with the ducklings, that they're looking down on the world, they're looking out at the world, they're looking from the side view of the world. We go in and out, we kind of zoom in as we're checking out the illustrations. And the illustrations really are not all that much different than the 1930s. We still have the pencil drawings, we still have the comfortable round lines. It is more of a brown color, at least in the book that I checked out. The shading is there, so we get some sense of textures that are going on. Still that thick, blended, dark and structured. We have that the pages are still white, and the mediums, as you can see from written on the screen, there are a number of new ones, at least from the 30s, that are being used and played around with as we head through the 1940 selections. One of my favorite books when I was looking at this time period was Prayer for a Child. And I think it's because I like the innocence of it. We still have the white page for the most part in the background, and then it's almost as though there's a picture that was being taken of the book, that's in the book, of the little girl. And then on the other side of the page, you see that there is a letter that's being highlighted, and it's not alphabetical by any means. It's just, if it starts with bless this milk and bless this bread, the B has an angel. It reminds me of the New Year's Eve angel with a candle lit that you would hope to have burned to the bottom so that you have good luck throughout the year. Something my family did every year. And so that's popped out, as across the page we have this beautiful picture of this little girl staring down angelically at her milk, and looks to me like she's got her hand on top of a cookie or a piece of bread, almost as though that's going to be a mess when she picks up her hand. But it's that thought process of all kids are angels as you read this, the sweetness of all of them. The little girl's drawing, even on the back wall, is a picture or a rendition that's almost of her, with smiling and a bow in her hair, and the stuffed animals are staring at her. Everything in this book is super sweet, absolutely adorable, but the illustrations are done with almost angelical angelic form in the background. All of the dolls that are in the background look like angels, and that, of course, gets transferred to our main character of the little girl. As it is a prayer book, so it's certainly very sweet. There was one book in this section I thought was pretty unique, and that was The Little Island. With this particular book, in this book, The Little Island, you see that they are using quite a bit different medium. And with all of ours, there's actually more mixed media that's being used than it just being drawings. And in this one, it is gouache, Gouache. It's a very bright coloring. It's almost as though it's been painted. And it's absolutely beautiful how intense the colors are, which, of course, when we go back to Galda and talking about those intense saturated colors, the feelings of energy, the vibrancy, the excitement that's there, it pulls us in with the water and what's going on with the animals. And so that's really exciting to see in the 40s, that they are playing around with new mediums to get their stories across. In the 1950s, just to make sure that I have that covered with the Make Way for Ducklings and the angles, and how all of those angles were exciting to see as children would read through that book and be able to see the world from different perspectives. Okay. In the 50s, again, the historical happenings that were going on were were referred to as the Golden Age. So we suddenly had color TV, and we suddenly then had the opportunity to see Elvis on TV, which, of course, really shook things up, I'm sure. The books that were the 1950 award winners brought in, again, more new media. There's more of the pastel, the colorings. This is from the Cinderella book. One of my favorites was actually Madeline's Rescue. I loved that the lines were drawn, and then within the lines, to me, it was more like fake people are being drawn there. We still have the 2-page spread, but it's that beautiful watercolor. So when I was blessed enough to be able to take students over to Europe last year, and we would see the artists that were in the park, and not all of the pages are like this. They're spread throughout. Otherwise, they're just yellow until they get to something super exciting. But they're going and visiting places throughout London, I believe, or Paris, excuse me. Visiting places throughout Paris, and suddenly you have this almost a watercolor feeling of, which is similar to Cinderella that's on the screen, almost a watercolor feeling, opaque watercolor, as though you could really purchase this and have it all come to life. It's a little bit more subdued of a watercolor, but they're absolutely beautiful in terms of having the shading and having the focus of the characters being right there in the middle, the intensity of the design being at the bottom of the page. A little bit more pointed than necessarily rounded edges when you see that there are situations where Madeline, for example, is scared and frightened, and she's being held by the nun on page 15. And of course, the book's called Madeline's Rescue. So of course she is scared. We see more diagonal angles and swirling as it's showing that tension, that movement. Otherwise, when it's very calm and they're they're at school, or they're having dinner, or they're going on their walk. Everything is just a yellow background, and then there's uniformity of the lines. There's a little bit diagonal as they're leading them through on the daily walk, and everybody's following the dog. And it's purposeful to have the reader's eye be able to follow the characters that are on the page. The placement is important as we go diagonal from the outside of the book into the middle of the book, and you have that have your eye follow those lines as they're actually walking. But the colors being yellow, I believe, are more that subdued to give us that boredom or that serenity, the average day kind of a thing until the adventure occurs. So it's fun to see that they're starting to do a little bit more of the storytelling with the colors and the mediums that they are choosing to put all of that together. In the 60s, again, here's our list of all of the award winners from the 60s. And at least in my opinion, the most popular of all of the books that are there happened to be from 1964, Where the Wild Things Are. And I just love the whimsical aspect of the book. I love that as you're looking at the story, you have the opportunity to kind of wonder and travel, and you have these big, possibly scary creatures that when you look at the drawing here, the main character is attempting to look ferocious, but there's pretty much a giggle on the creatures' faces as they're watching him. So in the 50s, we're seeing, again, more new media, mixed media that is being used, the creativity of the artists. It is a time period where, of course, there's the Vietnam War and hippies and drugs and rock and roll and all of those things. We did have President John F. Kennedy assassinated, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther's I Have a Dream Jr. speech, I Have a Dream speech. So that was certainly an important time period. When we look at the 60s with the books and the colors that are there, as I was saying with Where the Wild Things Are, that's not the only one that was like that. There's just the blissfulness of the snowy day. I think the snowy day is absolutely gorgeous in terms of the beauty of the artistic elements, the sledding that appears even on one of the first pages. Our main character, it's almost as though paper has been ripped to create these scenes. They don't have the white pages in the background anymore. We have the entire page being filled with the location that they're at. We have an African-American little boy. They don't, with the characters, really give them, or at least him, facial features so that you can see as much of his expression or specifically his mom's expression. But the book itself is beautifully done in terms of how we get the opportunity to see his joy even at the very end when he actually has the snow that he was hoping for, and then just the stampings throughout the book as we see the snow. And one of the coolest things is toward the back where we're looking at the picture itself and how the 2-page spread brings us in from the snow piles on the side down into the middle with Peter and his friend as they're going out to go play in the snow. More creativity, as I would expect anyway, as they're going through this. Our characters have a little personality, but disappointingly not as much in my opinion yet, especially looking at that particular book, The Snowy Day, where Peter isn't really developed all that much. But the artistic element of it is beautiful. As we head toward the 70s, as we head toward the 70s, our award winners are listed there. But the 70s allow for us to again see, and it's going to continue throughout every decade, a new artistry that's coming into play. And in the 70s, we still have the Vietnam War going on. There's more tragic events that are occurring, like the Munich Olympics massacre and the hostages in Iran. Of course, according to our website, for all of the historical events, which is thoughtco.com, it does mention Star Wars as being released in the 1970s. The main book that we were asked to look at, even though there's certainly a number of outstanding characterizations here, we have characters who are certainly more developed in size and in their coloration. Some beautiful creativity with the artwork, like with Noah's Ark. We don't just have the 2-page spread up top, but then there's actually even 4 other pages or 4 other boxes of illustrations that are down across the bottom until we actually hit the flood. And then the flood is very simple. It's a 2-page spread with just bits of streaks going across the page. And within those little bits of streaks, we have the actual arc. So it's very simple, but it's very well done because your eyes are not only drawn to it, but you can feel pulled into the storm itself. In The Arrow to the Sun, that particular book was 1975, and it is one of our controversial Caldecott Award winners. It is the tale of a Pueblo Indian, and we see so many beautiful geometric designs. They're very vibrant. They're very bold. It has that stylized look, although one person, I believe, called it more of a Halloween look. And it is supposed to be demonstrating just that energy that you're to be pulled in by. And one individual who reviewed the book, Arrow to the Sun, in a professional journal, said, "You're basically paying for some of the most gorgeous colors ever put in a children's book. The colors of the Southwest, with the shades of orange and yellow predominating. This could win prizes." And that was actually written by Cole. She calls it a book that about Indians that few Indians would recognize. Oh, excuse me. That was by Bet Patola, who announced this as the Caldecott winner in January 23rd, 1975. And as she was analyzing it, I mean, they're basically, in general, people were critical of the book because it is a book that is not only written by someone who is not a Native American, but it is also a book that it has the Kachinas in it. And as they're drawn, they are supposedly, it says, to blur the distinction between the Kachina representing a supernatural being, fire spirits, and the like, but not human beings. To blur that distinction is to rob the Kachina image of its point and to suggest wrongly that geometrical dolls represent the Pueblo image of people. From early times, Pueblos have drawn human beings realistically, and they're not drawn realistically in this. So it has some criticisms as people were not only struggling with the lack of recognition for Native Americans, but they were also struggling with the Kachinas that were being represented in the book. So it did have its controversy too. But the drawings themselves were considered to be quite beautiful with the coloration and the geometric design. And in the 70s, we do still have the watercolor, we have the woodcuts, we have the India ink, we have the full colored pen and pencil, but we have some new things that were going on too, like the gesso panels and the India ink. So it was kind of fun to see how they would pull the ideas of what was going on in the 70s to into the art. In the 1980s, we have the Cold War that was happening. The eruption of Mount St. Helens and the oil spill of the Exxon Valdez, and certainly the discovery of AIDS. On a positive note, we had some fun things going on, like Michael Jackson's Thriller video, which is certainly still around today, and I have yet to actually master that. When we look at the books that were going on in the 80s, we have, for example, The Owl Moon. And The Owl Moon, which was 1988, basically was praised for the way that the illustrations perfectly matched the mood of the story, which I really feel like most of the books did a really nice job of matching what was going on and helping to tell the story. So I appreciated that. We also have some really bright colors that are going on in the 1989 book, The Song and Dance Man, the primary colors and the illustrations that help to connect those positive emotions for children. My favorite during the 1980s was Jumanji, and the movie itself was my favorite, with one of my favorite actors. But Jumanji is oops, excuse me. Jumanji is oops. Does again those unique angles as you're looking down at the characters and you see the shadowing with the characters in the background. It's beautifully done. We have some new techniques that are being used and beautifully drawn, that we have the angles so that you can see the terror of the children. We zoom in and we pull back as the kids are running away. We have the shadowing. With the angles, we get a chance to see who has the power as you're looking up or looking down. The side angles and even the rain that happens and the fear that's going on as these animals are appearing. The shadows do a beautiful job of showing what's happening during that particular book. In the 1990s, we have the Cold War that's ended. Nelson Mandela was released from prison. And of course, the internet blew up. We have the book I'm sorry. I just moved this to the other side as I was organized with the rest. We have Rapunzel in 1997, where we have the 2-page spreads. So we have the kids, that allows the kids to kind of take their time searching for the pictures and finding new ideas that are in there. It's just kind of a juggle to get all the books and then pull them over so I can look at them and talk about them some more. Rapunzel with the 1998 award. The coloring that's done, each picture is basically its own artistic venture, in my opinion. There's so much that is detailed with each individual one. It's almost as though we could pull it out and it would be an oil painting. The lines are drawn to help you to follow each of the characters. We have some of the, as Galda was saying, the horizontal and the vertical drawings. So we have the vertical drawings when you're looking up at the tower and you can see Rapunzel, and it's exciting, it's active. We have the energy that's going on there. We also have more of the pointed things as we get into the fearful aspect of the sorceress who's involved in this with Rapunzel, and then the very soft features when you're looking at Rapunzel and her prince. So they're creative with the coloring. They're very detail oriented. 1998. It also is oil reproduced in full color, so that makes sense in terms of looking at each. I mean, that makes sense why you would want to look at each of the pictures as its own private artistic endeavor. In the 2000s, we have, there we go. And that particular one is not from Rapunzel, but it's actually from Smoky Night. We have our unrealistic characters. We have the fear in the eyes, or at least over here, that's how I interpret it. They're not very distinguished in terms of the characterization with our ethnic characters. But that's the way that Smoky Night is actually represented. And you can see that we have some new techniques that are here too, the hand tinting and the wood cuts. In 2000, we have September 11th that happened. We had anthrax issues. We have the Patriot Act, all the way through to the recession that officially began in 2007, and Barack Obama in 2009. In the year 2000, we look at the books. I know, isn't that one fun? Oh, that's from Flotsam. And you can see that we again are dealing with more of that, the watercolor, but there's also some hand-colored relief of prints and more of the scratchboard techniques that are involved in the 2000s. And with the book that's 2009, The House in the Night, we see how the illustrations and the author kind of work together, and you see this very calming story. It's beautifully lit. It's very warm. We have the soaring wings of the birds that go across. The illustrations themselves are just very, very warm and comforting with the family. And so that, I think, is typical of the year 2000, that we have all of these very gentle books. And then as we head toward 2010s until 2017, we have Osama bin Laden. That's and we have a number of terrorist attacks. We have Obama being reelected. We have shootings that were happening. We have all of these very kind of violent things that were going on. So you can see some of that reflected with our books too. And we're starting finally to get some more cultural things going on with our books. So while there are like Flotsam, where we have the children's literature having some more imagination going through them. We have Flying Frogs, for example, with the book Tuesday, and we have just some unusual plots that get a little bit more exciting. And the one book that I have pictured that's on here is Radiance Child. It's the 2017 book that won. And it's kind of creative in terms of how it's displayed. We see that the inside cover and the dust jacket are near replications. And we see that we have our collages in these sepia tones. We have the drawings that are, and then the abstract canvas that appears, and the blue and the chalking white stream of consciousness. I mean, there's all of these beautiful colorations that kind of bring to life that coloring with this particular book. And with that description for Radiance Child, I found quite a few other things that I thought were interesting in terms of how the book is put together, and that was in Wonders in the Dark and WordPress.com. With Higgins, as we look, the creativity of the illustrations in our numerous Caldecott books could actually be said to cultivate children's imaginations. I mean, that's what we're hoping for. And according to Higgins, after you become familiar with all of the definitions and the purposes and the trends of the multicultural children's literature, then you have the opportunity to use the evaluative measures, and they become more important. As we start looking at these checklists of what to look for in the books, whether it's the dialogues that go along with those illustrations, how we have heroes, and how we look at the child's self-image that's actually in the book. There's a number of really cool ways that we, not only as parents, but also as teachers or librarians, have the opportunity to provide for our students with more than just looking at the tale, but we get the opportunity to look at the total book and what's available for them to be able to experience. Thank you.